About one-third of the world's governments and dictatorships are on track to meet United Nations education targets aiming to change the values of humanity as part of its Education for All initiative, according to a report released last week by the UN Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO. With Common Core and related schemes, the Obama administration has been at the forefront of that effort. To deal with those that have not yet met UN schooling goals, UNESCO bureaucrats are seeking more than $22 billion per year in taxpayer funding to provide what the self-styled Global Education Agency refers to as quality education for all children. Going forward as a component of the broader UN post-2015 agenda, the UN outfit outlined even more extreme plans to impose its quality education scheming on all of humanity. However, as UN documents make clear, the planetary entity's vision for quality education is radically different from traditional American notions of proper schooling and instruction. For example, UNESCO documents and global agreements dealing with the UN education agenda focus a great deal on bringing about changes in attitudes, values and behavior. In official documents, UNESCO argues that these changes are required to move toward the sustainable new world they seek. The global education bureaucracy, which is also pushing planetary school standards, boasts of its efforts to turn children into global citizens. As the UNESCO Global Citizenship Education page explains, social justice, diversity, gender equality and environmental sustainability are needed to empower learners to be responsible global citizens. In an April 9 UN press release touting major gains toward meeting what it calls the world's education goals, the dictator-dominated global body summarizes the findings of its 2015 Global Monitoring Report Education for All 2000-2015, Achievements and Challenges. The report boasts that more and more children are now in early childhood care, an increase of nearly two-thirds in the last 15 years. Governments have also increased efforts to measure learning outcomes through national and international assessments, using these to ensure that all children receive the quality of education they were promised, the UN document explains. Of course, since taking power, the Obama administration has taken the lead in foisting the controversial UN goals onto the American people. In fact, Obama Education Secretary Ann Duncan, who referred to UNESCO as a global partner of the administration in its cradle-to-career agenda to shape the minds of children, has openly celebrated the unconstitutional scheming in speeches to the UN agency and other groups. Among the elements that have taken massive leaps forward are the Obama administration's push for more early childhood education and the vacuuming up of unprecedented amounts of data about American children. Perhaps the most obvious, though, is the administration's use of unconstitutional bribes to impose Common Core national standards on U.S. schools formerly controlled by local communities, as well as the accompanying federally funded national testing regime. The UN celebrated its global success in that regard, too. In 1990, 12 learning assessments were conducted according to national standards, but by 2013 the number had increased to 101, the UNESCO report boasts, as if stripping families and local communities of control over education and even the right to self-governance were somehow a positive development to be proud of. The controversial report also celebrates the UN role in pushing governments toward educational centralization via national and global assessments based on those national and international standards. Of course, those Obama-pushed national standards in the United States, as the New American has documented extensively, line up well with the radical global standards being pushed by globalists and the UN. In 2004, Chief Common Core financier Bill Gates even signed a cooperation agreement on education with UNESCO. The more than 500-page UN education report also outlines what it refers to as the post-2015 Global Education Agenda, which will be even more radical than the previous set of goals. This report draws on all of this experience, to make sharp recommendations for the place of education in the future global sustainable development agenda. The report summary, written by UNESCO boss and longtime Communist Party operative Irina Bokova, explains, with the term global sustainable development essentially interchangeable with planetary tyranny. The lessons are clear. New education targets must be specific, relevant and measurable. Even more Orwellian systems to gather sensitive information on all children around the world, similar to the Common Core linked data gathering and data mining schemes imposed on American states via bribes from the Obama administration, are also critical, the UN said about the next set of global education goals. The future agenda will also need ever stronger monitoring efforts, including data collection, analysis and dissemination, the summary continues. As the New American has documented extensively, parents would almost certainly be shocked and appalled by the intrusive violations of student and family privacy already being rolled out across the United States. UNESCO wants more of that worldwide. Indeed, UN bureaucrats bragged that there is much more to come. The world has made tremendous progress towards education for all, said UNESCO boss Irina Bokova, a Bulgarian Communist Party operative with well-established ties to the ruthless dictatorship that enslaved her nation until recent decades. However, the agenda is far from finished. UNESCO report director Aaron Binavot was even more explicit. Unless concerted action is taken and education receives the attention that it failed to get during the past 15 years, millions of children will continue to miss out, and the transformative vision of the new Sustainable Development Agenda will be jeopardized, he explained. So far, the radical UN education agenda to transform children into what its ringleaders refer to as green, so-called global citizens ready for the new world order, has advanced largely in the shadows. However, despite the lack of media attention and the brazen deception used to promote the plot, it was never truly a secret. Indeed, UNESCO's leadership has openly boasted about preparing humanity for world government based on humanism since it was founded. UNESCO's World Core curriculum has served as a template for the global education regime now being imposed on the planet. The curriculum was developed by UN Assistant Secretary General Robert Mueller, a self-declared disciple of Lucifer Publishing Company, now Lucis Trust, founder Alice Bailey. The plot got a major boost in 1990. When governments and dictators from around the world converged at the UN World Conference on Education for All. At that summit, UN member regimes agreed to the World Declaration on Education for All, meeting basic learning needs, the Jomtien Declaration. While obscure and misleading language is often used to conceal the agenda, mandatory government schooling for all, for example, as outlined in Karl Marx's 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, it is not difficult to see through it. Meeting basic learning needs constitutes a common and universal human responsibility, argues the declaration. In other words, education was no longer supposed to be a responsibility of families, local communities, or even national governments, but of the UN. It requires international solidarity and equitable and fair economic relations in order to redress existing economic disparities. The so-called basic learning needs of children are described by the UN agreement as, among other elements, the basic learning content required by human beings. Therefore, at least in the globalist mind, there is a need for global standards to ensure that all human beings learn the content that they require. Even children who do not attend government schools, homeschoolers, private school students, and more must rely on the same standards of learning applied to schools, the UN document states. More recently, the UN convened governments and dictators from around the world in 2000 to sign the Dhaka Framework for Action Education for All, meeting our collective commitments. That is where the formal goals addressed in last week's UNESCO report originated, unbeknownst to the overwhelming majority of humanity that was being targeted by the scheme. That document also explains what the UN and its mostly autocratic member regimes had in mind. For example, it demands that governments implement integrated strategies for gender equality in education which recognize the need for changes in attitudes, values and practices. Later on, the same report explains that to achieve gender equality in actuality, radical feminist doctrines aimed at getting all women into the workforce and all children into early childhood care changes in attitudes, values and behavior are required. The targets for those required shifts in values and behavior, of course, are your children. Even now, with support from the highest levels of the Obama administration, America's future, its children along with students around the world, are being subjected to UNESCO-backed sex education, absurd sight method reading methodologies that destroy literacy, dumb down educational standards to crush critical thinking abilities, and much more. If American parents and taxpayers do not rise up and put a stop to the abuse in the near future, the prospects for preserving liberty, prosperity, national sovereignty, biblical values and religion, and even common sense will continue to diminish. Common Core has already ignited a firestorm of transpartisan opposition across America among outraged teachers, parents, students, experts, and taxpayers. However, much more must be done if the globalist education plotting is going to be successfully crushed.